This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit. What do you guys want to talk about?
Mondays. The day all you 9-to-5ers look forward to. It's probably up there among the worst kinds of ways to start a conversation. I was thinking about it this morning. There's a lady that works at the registration desk at the gym I go to, and she checks everybody in when they come in the morning. I see her every single Monday when I go in. And, I try to be all nice and casual, like, good morning, how you doing, that kind of stuff. And she's a sweet lady. There's nothing wrong with her, but her answer is always the same thing. I ask her how she's doing, and she says, "It's Monday." And I never know how to respond. Like, the literalist in me would want to give her the smartass response, like, duh. Good analysis, ma'am. Yeah, I know she's just trying to be kind. The moral to the story is, I hate small talk. And anybody that tries small talk with me, just keep walking. Not about that life. If you don't have anything meaningful to contribute to a conversation, just don't even bother. I've been that way since I was 8. Call me a prick. Sure, why not? But it'd be best not to waste both of our time. Speaking of contributing to conversations, that is exactly what we're here to do. We've got a long list of stuff on the agenda today. In addition to the normal SmackDown and Retro Raw shows, we've got to talk about this WWE Backlash Premium Live special that aired on Saturday night on the Peacock. The good old Peacock, where glitches and technical malfunctions are bound to occur. What was it? Was the Elimination Chamber show I watched where I had to keep closing and reopening the app because it kept crashing and buffering every 10 seconds? Good Lord. Now, surprisingly, I did not have any issues streaming this one. I had one brief buffering problem during the main event, and that was about it. So maybe that's why I'm in a somewhat decent mood right now. I mean, we don't ask for much when it comes to streaming services. Just please make the crap work correctly. I ain't paying you $10 a month to get a low-budget value. I mean, I certainly ain't adding additional monthly fees for exclusive premium content either. I get those occasional emails trying to advertise, hey, you should get the upgraded service so you can see this exclusive content, or check out this show if you pay an extra $3 a month. And I'm like, how about no? How about no? Not with the garbage you're advertising. Can't believe people watch some of those shows. No, I am strictly on the Peacock for wrestling. That is the only thing I care about. Occasional streaming of some Law and Order, but that's about where my buck stops. But I don't want to make this a 3-hour rant on Peacock again. Instead, what do you say we get going with the show and try to get through this one in a reasonable length of time? I'm going to knock out the Retro Raw and the SmackDown reports first, and then we'll go to the Backlash review at the very end. If you came for the Backlash review only, just skip to the end and find it. I don't do whatever they're called, timestamps. I mean, I don't do them for a reason. It just takes way too long. Self-editing. This is a one-man show. I talked about it before. We do this all from scratch. Deal with it. But we'll do the Retro Raw review first because, I don't know, guess I feel like torturing myself early on this week. And we're still on the road to the WWF King of the Ring pay-per-view. Still in the early stages of the qualifying matches. And what better way to determine our first qualifier than with the opening bout on this week's Raw? Funny enough, it is Razor Ramon versus Quang. And while you might look at that on paper and think, okay, well, what's so unique about that matchup? Well, in 1994, it would have been just a standard Raw match. But we all say hindsight is 2020. And when you consider about a year out from now, they were repackaging Savio Vega, who worked the Quang gimmick, and then made him the kayfabe friend of Razor Ramon on television. Well, it kind of changes the game a little bit. Very interesting how Razor never realized that his childhood best friend was under a mask that whole time. And actually, I lied a minute ago when I said this was the first King of the Ring qualifier. Apparently, they already held a match the previous weekend on WWF Superstars, which IRS won. So this was actually the second match in the series. Anyway, while Razor was beating up his childhood friend and having absolutely no recollection that this was the case, they were out there having a back-and-forth seesaw match. Got to remember those classic Vince jingoisms. And, it was relatively steady with both guys getting the leverage at various points early on. And I don't want to be hypocritical because, I literally just sat here on the Friday show complaining about a match I saw on Dynamite recently where the whole thing was essentially just a back-and-forth exchange of moves the entire time with, no coherency to anything going on. This was not the case, though. Yes, Razor and Savio were trading offensive moves, but it wasn't just you hit a move, then I hit a move, lather, rinse, repeat. It was worked in the form of two big guys jockeying for position. They were evenly matched when it came to height and size, but they also had different styles. Razor was the street fighter and Savio was the martial artist. A little bit of a clash of styles when you pair them together in the ring, but they kind of worked under that umbrella with both guys sort of being evenly matched in skill. So it was actually a struggle for Razor to remain in control for long periods of time. I did laugh at the point where they drew attention to the fact that Razor's bottom lip got cut open. So, of course, Vince goes into his whole corporate PG spiel about how if things get too graphic for the audience, they'll make sure they zoom the camera out so as to not show the blood. Keeping in mind, this is a family show, pal. I'm just sitting there thinking, Jim Cornette is rolling on the floor listening to that statement. Ridiculous. It's fucking professional wrestling. And Vince is out there talking about how this is a family show. Like it's a PBS network where they're airing Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Give me a break. By the way, the cut on the lip was barely noticeable. Like, you would literally have to strain to see that on television if you were really trying to look for it. But they came back from break. Razor was trying to milk the big comeback on Savio. I keep calling him Savio instead of Quang. I mean, the latter sounds like I'm trying to hack up a hairball, so Savio is easier to say. It's more preferable. But they actually had a great finish to this. Another one of those instances where I think Razor legitimately fucked up the Razor's Edge, but, instead of panicking and drawing attention to it, he actually worked it into the story. He tried to hoist up Quang over his shoulders, but sort of lost his grip on him and ended up falling down. So he sold it for a bit. And they recovered. They did a spot where Razor ducked the spinning wheel kick off the ropes. And then he called for the move again. He managed to get Savio up on the second go-around. And then he hit the Razor's Edge for the 3. Crowd didn't give him a hard time for it. They didn't chant, "You fucked up," like all the idiot marks would do in today's business. They stayed with it. And when Razor got it the second time around, they all cheered him even louder. Because, hey, he got him. Not the most exciting match in the world, but it was effective. It's another case of me talking about Razor being a very underrated talent in the ring. You know, I know people used to give him a hard time, especially by the time he phoned it in during his latter run in WCW. But I'm telling you, man, when that guy was in his prime, he could go. When Razor was motivated, he was right up there with some of the better workers in the WWF by this point. You know, probably not on the level of a Bret Hart in terms of being a sound in-ring technician, but comparing him to the likes of Shawn or a Macho Man or Mr. Perfect or even an Owen Hart, definitely. I know that'll piss off all the Shawn marks out there, but tough shit. Get over it. You know, it's easy to crap on Razor for all of his tribulations, but don't ever discount how good that guy was in the ring, especially for his size. So after that, we had Todd Pettingill doing another King of the Ring update, which really wasn't all that different from what we saw last week. Again, he just kind of ran down the theme of the tournament and talked about what the talents have to do in order to survive the longevity of it. What I did want to cover here was the other part of the card update. We had the official acceptance speech from Roddy Piper. We know Jerry Lawler's been challenging him on TV. If you'll recall, we've seen a few instances where Lawler was calling out Piper on the King's Court talk shows, obviously throwing shade at Piper and calling him out publicly. So in order to set that match up and make it official, we get this really strange, bizarre pre-tape with Piper answering. It appeared this was taped from Piper's RV on the set of Tough and Deadly, which was one of the movies he was starring back during that time. Whatever year that movie came out. I guess it would have still been in production by this point, so maybe the following year. In any case, he brings in the camera crew to basically discuss how we live in a world where there are no kings. And his conclusion in order to get to that point is that we're all human. We eat, we poop. Therefore, there are no such thing as kings. All right then. We're already off to a rather wacky start. And while he's covering the fact that Lawler's been looking for any excuse to call him out, he eventually concludes that he will accept the challenge. There was something where he talked about sending Lawler to the same hospital in Toronto that was currently housing the Sick Children's Organization. He said something about how he doesn't take dives for anybody. Insider references. I'm surprised he didn't just flat out go with, "I don't do jobs, brother." And, well, that was Roddy's very obscure promo, accepting Jerry Lawler's challenge. And meanwhile, the proceedings go to the Children's Hospital in Toronto for sick kids. Yeah, I got nothing. It was a Roddy Piper promo. I usually never know what to make of Piper's promos. I've seen plenty of them. I've watched plenty of Piper content in my lifetime. It's always a guessing game with him. Try to figure out what the fuck that guy's talking about for more than 50% of his dialogue. Good luck. And this was probably one of his more comprehensible promos. From there, though, we continue with the regularly scheduled programming. Crush had a quick squash with Raymond Roy. It ranged anywhere from boring to sleep-inducing. Crush beat him up for a few minutes and won with a heart punch. During Vince and Macho Man's TV plugs for the upcoming USA shows, they also ran down some of the remaining content for the program this week, including the announcement that Mabel will be in action later on. And I believe Vince's quote was something along the lines of, Mabel is approximately 2 large men wrapped into one. I thought, was that a poor attempt at humor, or was it a clever, underhanded fat joke? In either case, can't dispute it. Duke the Dumpster Droese is also still coming to the WWF. Says that he's going to climb the ladder of success right after he climbs to the top of the trash heap he was hanging out at. Because, he's a garbage man. Pee-hee. Speaking of bad gimmicks, Doink was up next to wrestle. The real Doink. Not the fake Doink, masqueraded by Double J. Although, now that I think of it, there is something oddly humorous about the visual of seeing Jeff Jarrett in a full clown outfit. Anyone out there that ever resented the idea that Double J was getting rammed down your throat as a main eventer all those years, this was the visual that sort of underscored the issue with that. It was a typical Doink comedy match. I pooned it a million times over. By this point, Matt Bourne was no longer working the gimmick as a heel, so the novelty kind of wore off by this point. I can never remember who took over as the babyface Doink, but quite frankly, it never mattered to me. Anything babyface Doink was just all kinds of horrible, especially by 94. You got Dink out there running blatant interference in front of the official and getting involved left and right. Of course, he does nothing about it. And after they do some hokey comedy spots, Doink hits the whoopee cushion on the job guy and pins him. They also had Double J on the phone momentarily to try to get some heat on himself by making fun of the midget clown. It didn't work. I always go back and forth on him. The one thing I never take away from Jarrett, he always worked the classic old school Memphis heel role very well. But you put him in a WWF setting, and you put him in there with Doink the Clown. Just a total dead-end feud. My God. I mean, it just sucked. There's just no other way to bluntly put it. Didn't do anything for anybody involved. Just the prototypical Vince comedy of the mid-90s. The only person that got a kick out of it, and everybody else farted in his general direction. From there, though, speaking of Vince ideas, we come to this Earthquake voiceover where he's talking about his sumo career. And if you remember last week, he challenged Yokozuna to find out who the biggest, baddest man in the WWF is. So naturally, he's talking about his sumo career prior to joining the WWF, saying that he went 24-0 undefeated, which is a lie. If you actually look at the wiki page, he was actually 21-0-7 for the 1 year he wrestled. He won 21 straight matches in a row, and then by July of that same year, he had 7 consecutive draws. And then he retired shortly thereafter. So it wasn't technically undefeated in the literal sense. But talked about how he established the name Kodo Tenzan. And then he said that he has much more to accomplish in the WWF. To which I noted, so much so that it was within a matter of days after this taping where Earthquake subsequently vanished from the WWF, left for Japan, and then wound up in WCW by 1995 as a member of the Dungeon of Doom. So, yeah. So much for that goal of accomplishing more shit in the WWF. Can't remember if it was ever explained how or why Earthquake left with very little notice. Especially when they were right in the middle of this thing with Yokozuna. But I don't know, chalk it up to bad timing, I guess. He's there for a cup of coffee, and then he's gone before you know it. Never to be seen or spoken of again. At least in a WWF setting. I believe we did get the payoff for this, though. And I'm going to cover it in the King's Court segment that followed this. But, yeah, that was Earthquake's 30-second deep dive into his sumo career. Riveting. Then we had Yokozuna, Jim Cornette, and Mr. Fuji out with Lawler to answer Earthquake's challenge. And naturally, Corny is doing all the talking here, saying that Earthquake talks a big game and likes to reminisce about the past, but when he was working sumo matches in Japan, they were still living in prehistoric times without electricity. Says that Yokozuna is the king of sumo wrestling because Yokozuna actually means grand champion. So, Corny proposes a challenge. Instead of just running with the ordinary wrestling match, how's about a sumo match with Earthquake and Yokozuna? They can take the ropes down and treat it like a standard sumo match. Whoever gets thrown off the platform and out of the ring is the loser. And of course, the heels are goading Earthquake into accepting the offer, saying he'll never do it because he's a coward. All the while, I'm watching Cornette deliver some closing heel verbiage, literally dripping sweat like a fucking broken faucet. I mean, Yokozuna was pretty glistening by the end there too, but I'm just watching Corny do this promo, and I'm like, God, this guy looks like he's about to have a stroke. I just thought, how hot was it actually in those buildings back in the day? Like, was it that uncomfortably warm in the venues, or were these guys really just in that bad a ring shape physically? I mean, I know Corny ballooned up pretty badly during this point of his career, but good God. I mean, Lawler looked perfectly fine out there, but everyone else looked like they were on the verge of passing out. In any case, there's your challenge. It was certainly a segment that occurred. Not the most compelling talk segment. And when you factor in that this feud literally never went anywhere outside the one-and-done sumo blow-off, it really wasn't even much of a feud, period. It's like we talked about before, though, with Yokozuna, man. This is what they had him doing after he dropped the belt to Brett. He was stuck in mid-card purgatory till pretty much the end of his run. Now, granted, things picked up a little bit for him later on in the year, but up to this point, he was just sort of a dude on the show. Kind of unfortunate. Meanwhile, we got more Undertaker cameos, building up to his inevitable TV return. Also meant more hideously bad acting. Just running through the gauntlet of the professions here in these wacky vignettes. Now we got lawn workers talking about seeing The Undertaker in broad daylight. Saying that The Undertaker was sleeping in trenches they dug. Very compelling. I was glued to the screen during this pre-tape. And to round things out on this general abomination, Mabel worked the main event match with Mike Bell, which was mainly just an infomercial so Savage could talk about receiving an anonymous note from an anonymous person. That was a direct quote. And this alleged anonymous note from said anonymous person said that Earthquake accepted Yoko's challenge for the sumo match next week. That was primarily the main takeaway from all this. And meanwhile, the match that was going on was boring as all get out. They went about 2 minutes, and Mabel won with the Boss Man sidewalk slam. I wrote nothing else down. Although I will say, they drew very little attention to Mo during this. Obviously, we know the Men on a Mission tag team was the thing for a while, but you can start to see that Vince was getting some ideas for Mabel down the road. Perhaps a singles push was in store for him. The only other bullet point I jotted down was Lawler's 20-second interview with Earthquake, trying to get confirmation that he actually accepted Yoko's challenge. And, well, turns out that anonymous source wasn't ribbon. Earthquake is officially accepting the sumo match for Raw next week. So get ready for that. If you're squeamish about the visual of two large, jiggly men wearing essentially nothing but a loincloth, you may want to duck out to use the bathroom or something during that segment. Equally as such, if you're prone to vomit during bad wrestling segments, you might want to have a barf bucket on standby for that one. I've seen, I think, one sumo match in the context of a pro wrestling environment before, and it was when they did it with Big Show that one year at WrestleMania, and it sucked back then. Yokozuna and Earthquake in a fake sumo fight on next week's Raw. Sounds horrible. I have no memory of ever seeing it. So we'll see if it compares to the Big Show sumo fight. In the meantime, Raw rolls on with more upcoming qualifying matches for the King of the Ring tournament and more possible wacky Roddy Piper promos, where he drops more insider terminology and does more incoherent psychobabble for 5 minutes straight. Meanwhile, I continue to wonder where the WWF champion is, seeing as how he's been MIA for a month straight, barely even mentioned on the show. It's almost on par with watching WWE, where the world champion pops in once every 5 months and is barely ever on the show. Hence how we've gone to the current fucked up culture in WWE, where now we're about to have a second major world champion on the Raw brand, because the current world champion Roman Reigns is off of television and probably won't be back for, well, whenever they decide to bring him back to work his next program. So SummerSlam. And while I know I'm being somewhat facetious there, I'm not entirely off base either, because that's basically what we're about to have by the end of the month. We'll have a part-time undisputed world champion representing the SmackDown brand who works occasional pay-per-view matches, and the rest of the time he'll be off filming movies or sitting on his ass at home. And then on Raw, we'll have another fake world champion who will actually be on the show more than twice a month, and then we'll start wondering to ourselves, wait a minute, if they're just going to create a second world title again, wouldn't it just be more productive to take the current world title off of Roman and put it on a guy that you know is actually going to be around? And the answer to that question is WWE logic. Whatever seems like the obvious choice, go with the polar opposite of that. That's usually how WWE rolls with things. So SmackDown, technically still in pre-draft mode. It's been brought to many people's attention that the draft does not actually kickstart until, I believe they said, the night after Backlash. So as of this current recording, when they air Monday Night Raw, a lot of people got bent out of shape about that too. Good God. I thought AEW fanatics were out of control. There's still some crazy WWE fans out there that'll just defend this fucking company till kingdom come. They're equally as bad. Anyway, taking a look at SmackDown from Friday night, the night before the Backlash special in Puerto Rico, they were actually at the venue for the go-home show, wherever this was, the Jose Miguel Argolo Coliseum in San Juan. And I was going to half-ass attempt a Puerto Rican accent there, but maybe for the sake of my credibility, I'll just give you the American pronunciation of it. And I actually wrote down Michael Cole's opening line at the start of the show because this is just grand. He says, on an island filled with world-class beaches. And I thought to myself, wow, Michael Cole, using the derogatory slang to describe party girls. Way to go, Michael. Then I realized, oh wait, he meant actual beaches. Not those kinds of beaches. But they actually had a really cool drone camera shot coming into the building from the outside. And it was a packed crowd. Looked awesome. I'm not entirely sure how they pulled off that camera shot, but hats off to the production team for that. And while yes, you can argue, why would you be filming the TV show from the same venue you're planning on doing a live pay-per-view special the following night? Well, I mean, it's not the first time they've done it. I agree. I think part of the appeal of doing a pay-per-view or a live special from a venue like this is getting to see the actual shot of the crowd and the production setup for the first time. Like, you do it once, by the time you see it the following night, the mystique is kind of worn off, so I get the argument. But the crowd was super hot. That I can't argue. When they started the show with Rey Mysterio, Zelina Vega, and the LWO goons, and they all came out to do a promo, these guys may have well as been Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, and the Road Warriors, accompanied by Baby Doll. That was how over they were in this fucking building. And granted, I didn't write a whole lot down about Rey's promo. I mean, 90% of it was in Spanish anyway. They really didn't get that far before the Judgment Day interrupted. I calculated here, I believe the 73rd week in a row we've seen Rey and the LWO versus the Judgment Day in some kind of face-to-face capacity. And the Judgment Day take about 9 years to get to the ring. The best part was when Dom Mysterio ripped up an LWO shirt at ringside in the front row, Michael Cole's follow-up line. What an ass. I actually popped for that. Anyway, they're doing the back and forth banter for a while. Dom had more heat here than the night Shawn Michaels tried to troll the Montreal fans twice in one segment. Still one of my favorite Shawn Michaels moments of all time. But the long and short of it is, Rey challenged Dom to a rematch from WrestleMania, even though Rey won that match clean, so he had no reason to reissue the challenge. Rhea stepped in and challenged Rey to a match, which, I mean, hey, I'm not really an advocate of intergender wrestling, but if there was ever a case to be made where I could believe that a woman would believably able to beat the shit out of the dude, this was it. They're few and far between, but yeah, I could buy that Rhea would give Rey a run for his money. But instead, they had Zelina step in and stand up to Rhea, which looked visually ridiculous. Looked like Rhea staring down a toddler on the playground. And, well, they settled on the mixed tag. And then Dom took a cheap shot at Rey, pie-faced him, and bailed. Which, again, got a nuclear heat reaction from the crowd. So I can't say the segment didn't work, because that'd be a lie. The crowd hated Dom and the Judgment Day. And if the goal was to excite people for a match later on where they'd be able to see Dom get his comeuppance for being a pest, it worked. It was a nothing segment, but for the Puerto Rico fans, it came off great in the venue. You know what didn't come off great in the venue, though? The Viking Raiders versus the big, boring, bald-egg jobbers of the OC. Talk about an easy way to suck the air out of the room. Book a Carl Anderson-Luke Gallows match on TV. That'll put the children to bed for the night. I mean, it's not to say the match was awful, but whatever. I don't get Anderson and Gallows at all. I never understood what people liked about them. They had that first run that was a complete waste of time and money. Like, AJ was the clear standout of the group. The other two are just collective wastes of space. mean, they got future endeavored, and for whatever reason, Hunter decided to bring him back, and yeah, not one of his better financial investments. The match was mid. I mean, I nearly fell asleep watching it. They did some stuff for a while. The OC made a comeback at the end, and they hit one of the Raiders with a magic killer and pinned him. AJ was on commentary the whole time, and I have no idea why he wasn't booked in this match. Is he still hurt? I mean, I heard him and Wade Barrett talking about some injuries he'd been undergoing lately, so he was on the shelf for a while. Is he still in bad shape? Because if he's healthy enough to work, I'd have been putting AJ out there to wrestle instead, but that's just me. I mean, the OC were drafted to SmackDown last week, so you got to put them over somehow. I don't really know what you do with them as a unit, outside maybe feuding them with the Judgment Day, but didn't I just read that the Judgment Day got drafted to Raw? So where does that leave the OC? You got a 4-team faction with no one to feud them with? And unless you wind up doing something with AJ in a singles role, which I'd be down for. You know, pushing him over the ball jobbers is more preferable anyway. And Mia Yim is just kind of there. So that's all I really got out of that match. Then we had the Raw Women's Champion Bianca Belair out for a segment. You know, the Raw Women's Champion on SmackDown. Because, well, the draft. Yeah, it totally makes sense, right? Not a flaw to be had there. And you may be wondering to yourself, well, did Bianca come out to talk about what she's going to do with the Raw Women's title, considering she's now been drafted to SmackDown? Is she going to relinquish the title? Is she going to swap belts with Rhea? Is she going to paint the Raw Women's title blue and then just call it the SmackDown title? How's it all going to work? Good question. And it's still unanswered. The answer for the time being is she's just going to keep showing up on SmackDown as the Raw Women's Champion despite none of it making a goddamn lick of sense. And I guess we just kind of roll with it. No, what she did come out to talk about was the title match at Backlash with Io Sky, which we'll cover when we get to the Backlash report. She mentioned something about closing in on the achievement of becoming the longest reigning women's champion in the modern era. I have no idea how many days that would be, but if I had to venture a guess, considering how long most women's title reigns have lasted in WWE over the years, I'd say, 100 days? Well, in any case, she got interrupted, surprise, surprise. Here come Bayley and crew, better known as Damage Control, the faction that's been around for going on 2 years now, and I still have no idea what the purpose of the group is or why Bayley, Dakota Kai, and Io Sky are friends. And here we are in 2023, I still have no idea what the point of the group is. I also still didn't understand the psychology of doing Bianca versus Io for the title when I'm pretty sure that everybody involved in this segment was already drafted to SmackDown. So hypothetically, even if Io won the title at Backlash, spoiler, she didn't, but even if she did, it would still technically be a SmackDown talent carrying a Raw title on the Friday show. Which wouldn't make any sense either. But don't think about it too hard. You might give yourself a seizure. Anyway, I'll try to wrap this up as quickly as I can because this segment ate a dick. Bianca promo, heels interrupted, Bayley Heat promo, something about Michael Cole being owned by Damage Control. So sex slave, I imagine. And, Well, they tried to beat up Bianca until Liv Morgan and Raquel Fernandez Torres de Legado IV ran out for the save. The visual was hilarious because if you watch the shows live, the aisleway was actually kind of curved before you actually got down to the ring. So when you had Liv and Raquel running down to make the save at the end, it took them almost a full minute to run down too because the aisleway was so freaking long. But then on their way down, they also had to take a hard left turn. So all you see are two girls running full speed down the aisleway. And right as they reach the point where it kind of rotates, they have to basically stop in their tracks so they can turn their whole entire bodies and then start taking off again before they run directly into the wall. The point is, it looked ridiculous. And Liv Morgan's music still sucks. Watch me. Fuck off. Fucking prissy-ass Barbie doll. And then following that, we had a skit in the back where the Usos were asking Solo Sikoa if he's with it. And, no, I don't think Solo was with it. Told the Usos that he's going to do his part in the sixth man, and Jimmy and Jay better do theirs. To be continued on that one. The next match was the Street Profits versus Marcel the Shell and Fabio Ichabod of Imperium. And at this point in the show, I had already been subjected through a lot of underneath material that I did not give one flying fuck about. So I took this opportunity to hit the can and release some of the bowel. The stench of mediocrity. And then funny enough, right as I dipped out and went to sit down in the toilet, the only thing I heard in the other room was 1, 2, 3, followed by a huge pop. And I peeked my head out the door momentarily to see that the Street Profits were already celebrating in the ring. So whatever the hell happened within that 2-minute time span that I got up and left, I imagine it was all entrance. Sucks to be Imperium. But they're going over to Raw now, so good riddance. I'm still pissed about them taking Gunther with them, though. I did catch the next segment, however. The in-ring promo with Cody Rhodes. Because, again, Cody Rhodes, recently the first-round draft pick to Raw, now showing up on SmackDown. Because WWE logic.
Oh, but Tony, the draft did not start until after Backlash, so technically this did not count.
Oh, shut the fuck up. As if that's ever mattered with the way WWE does brand splits. Raw champions being drafted to SmackDown, Raw talent showing up on SmackDown, and vice versa. The whole thing's a complete clusterfuck. So what do you guys want to talk about? Beyond the stupidity of the brand split. Well, Cody came out to talk about Brock, covered a lot of ground, saying that for many wrestlers in the WWE, they could go their entire careers never having to face Brock Lesnar in a match. But the problem is that Cody wasn't the one that picked the fight with Brock. Brock actually picked the fight with Cody. And like his former coach Double A once told him, when you finally reach the kingdom, that is when you know you have made it to the top in the business. And this is all part of Cody's redemption story. Beating Brock Lesnar is the way that he gets himself back on track to reclaiming his throne and winning the title to conclude his story. And it's kind of all there was to the promo. It was about 3 minutes and change, but did what it was supposed to do. Selling the big fight feel for the match the following night. Again, trying to avoid getting too deep into spoilers because we're going to talk about the Backlash show shortly, but I didn't have an issue with this. Again, I haven't really been following this program extensively on Raw, so can't really judge one way or the other how good a job they've done at building this up, but I mean, there was definitely some intrigue here. Still think it would have been better with a championship on the line, but again, I'm not going to get into all that. But again, no issue with that. Nor did I have an issue with Matt Riddle's wacky promo in the back with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. Again, if you know Matt Riddle and the way he delivers promos, it was exactly what you would expect. He did a rambling promo on the Bloodline, talked about what Owens, Sami, and he are going to do in that 6-man, and right as he got to the end, he turns and goes, "Do you guys have anything to add? I feel like I'm rambling on and on at this point." And after Owens and Zayn reassure that there is nothing left to say, they keep the camera on Riddle so he can smile and act all goofy. I laughed. Most people probably didn't. But I happen to get a kick out of Riddle's goofiness. It's not for everybody, but I've hung out with enough people to know that there is some comic relief to some of this wackiness. Still not a fan of the green nail polish or the backwards baseball cap. But baby steps along the way. Baby steps. From there, we had the Shinsuke Nakamura Karrion Kross match that apparently they are blowing off after all. I mean, I figured they were just moving on from this since both guys are going to be wrestling on separate brands, but I mean, they already teased it. Guess they had to pay it off somehow, even if it was short-lived. And after seeing the match actually go down, kind of glad it was a short-lived program. You know, from the moment Kross called out Nakamura in that backstage pre-tape that one week, I just thought, this feud is so random and so out of left field. Just doesn't seem like a whole lot of thought was put into it. And then we come to find out by the time the draft is over, Nakamura is now going to Raw. Kross is staying on SmackDown. So at the end of the day, guess I was right. There really didn't seem to be a whole lot of forethought put into this. I mean, they did some stuff for a while. It was fine. Kind of a clash of styles at various points where I don't think Kross really knew how to feed for a lot of Nakamura's kicks and strikes. Looked a little awkward in there at times. But they did a couple false finishes at the end. Nakamura ended up firing back on Kross, hit him with a Kinshasa and pinned him. Babyface over clean. I presume that's the blow-off. Funny how in SmackDown, the blow-off is them putting over the new Raw guy and having one of the SmackDown guys do the job. Way to pass the torch to the other brand, guys. I don't know. I mean, if they're going to have 2 world titles now, they're going to need some top challengers on Raw. Nakamura's been around for a while, and he's had main event runs before. None of them have really worked well in his favor, but I mean, he's a guy that you could always put in that spot, and he'll make it work. Meanwhile, Kross is... well, he's still Karrion Kross. A guy they've tried to reconcile by giving him a second run on the main roster and really hasn't gone anywhere. I remember we were all crapping on Vince a few years ago for deliberately going out of his way to sabotage his main roster run once they took him out of NXT, but now that we've seen Kross under the new creative regime without Vince's influence overseeing it, I think it's safe to say there may be a bigger issue at play here. And I've covered this before. The fact that Kross is a fine athlete, he's good at working the heel role on television, but once you get past the flashy entrance and all the woo-woo production, he's kind of just a guy. He does nothing wrong in the ring. He's always in the right place. He executes his spots fine. But really, there's not much beyond him just being a solid hand as a talent. I mean, he suffices as an upper mid-card talent. Someone you might have used in the territories to help elevate a new and upcoming babyface. But is he world champion material or somebody you would put stock in being your main heel for an extended period of time? Not really. And it's really hard to pinpoint what the exact issue is with him. But I've always kind of narrowed the conversation down to he's fine. But that's kind of where the buck stops with him. He's okay and just okay. Even when he was in NXT, Scarlett was kind of the standout of that duo. I always talk about how Cross was better when he was bald. Then he grew his hair out. Now he just kind of looks very generic. And that's more of a nitpicky thing than anything else. On a list of top 50 guys I would consider pushing in today's business, I don't know, he might rank in the top 40s. Possibly. Certainly not a bad talent. You could get some use out of him, but are there better talents out there? Yeah. And the other problem with Cross is they've beaten him like a drum. It's like, how long are you going to keep riding that old horse before you finally just put it out of its misery? When do you just sort of give up and move on? Maybe they already have. Hence they beat him on television here in less than 10 minutes in a feud that never got off the ground to begin with. Again, I'm not trying to give the guy a hard time. It's just the reality of where we are now. Cross has been there for a while, and they really haven't got a return on that investment. Sending him away for a while would probably be their best option, but even if you bring him back, is it going to matter? Have the people already been exposed to the fact that he's just kind of mid? It's a tough call. But this certainly didn't help him any. People always talk about that promo exchange with him and Adam Cole a few years ago in NXT, and yeah, I remember that promo. It didn't do a lot of favors for Cross after the fact. Just throwing it out there. So at this point, they kind of went through a rapid-fire package of all the NXT call-ups that were part of the draft, including the one guy that's getting the featured match on next week's SmackDown, my man, Cameron Grimes. Got a little too excited there when I saw that they called him up to SmackDown. But Lord knows that guy's been collecting dust in NXT for the last 3 years. That guy should have been called up a long-ass time ago, back before they even rebranded the old NXT. But they finally called him up. They also shaved his beard, which I was very disappointed to see. But he's still Cameron Grimes. And we all know where he's going. He's going to the moon. Unfortunately, he's going to the moon next week with Baron Corbin. Because of course he is. Obviously, they were going to make his first match against Baron fucking Corbin. Probably a rib. Hunter said, Cameron, your goal is to get a watchable match out of Baron Corbin without him putting everybody to sleep. Good luck. And if anyone can save it, Cameron Grimes is the guy for the job. But all kidding aside, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with him. I'm not looking forward to seeing him wrestle Baron Corbin next week, but seeing Cameron Grimes actually wrestle on TV, that'll be fun. I love the stuff he did in NXT a few years ago. One of my favorite feuds was the thing he did with LA Knight and Ted DiBiase with the $1 Million Championship. It's a shame they kind of just threw that all under the bus after it was over, but I thought Grimes and DiBiase had some really good chemistry together on TV. And I remember he wrestled somewhere else under a different name. I can't remember what company it was for. Might have been Impact. And I was never really blown away with anything I ever saw of him on the indie scene. I had seen a lot of his work prior to when he came to the WWE, but there just wasn't a lot there. And then they kind of repackaged and gave him a gimmick, and as soon as his personality came through, it's amazing. His career took right off. And he's worked both sides of the aisle too, face and heel, so that's good. He's versatile. Definitely interested to see what they do with him on the main roster. Hopefully it doesn't involve an extended TV feud with bland-ass Corbin, because, oh yeah, that would be no good. But anyway, let's quickly cover the main event here, and so I can talk about the Backlash show. The mixed tag with Rey and Zelina Vega versus Dom and Rhea. At the time the entrances started for this match, they had about 20 minutes left in the show. By the time the bell actually rang for the start of it, there were approximately 12. I wrote down, if they cut every ring entrance on this show, they could literally make room for an extra 15 minutes of wrestling. Easily. Now, of course, you know the rules of mixed tag matches. Men can fight the men, women can fight the women. In the rare cases where the women can fight the men, but not vice versa, because, equality in wrestling. Of course, it's only fair. Girls can hit the guys, but guys can't fight back on the girls. That's modern feminist logic for you. And of course, anything Zelina Vega does physically looks ridiculous when she's fighting most women, much less doing spots with the guys. She's like 5 feet even, probably weighs 98 pounds if you filled her boots with cement. Like, her trying to remotely have a competitive match with Rhea Ripley is visually insulting, as we'll discuss more when we cover the title match from the Backlash show. Yeesh. Everything they did here was kept fairly basic. They didn't really have a lot of time to work with, so they had to keep things moving here. The babyfaces had the flurry of offense early on. The heels cut off Zelina and worked her over. She was able to dodge a running attack in the corner so she could tag in Rey. Rey was able to milk the comeback on Dom. We had some four-way spots at the end with everybody. Rhea tried to cut off Rey for a 619, but Zelina pulled her down and shoved her into the barricade. And then Rey hit the 619, but had to fend off Balor on the ring apron. And I actually kind of like the finish they went with here. Obviously you knew Dom was going to get nuclear heat doing pretty much anything in this match. Like, he could have sneezed on the apron and the fans would have booed him out of the fucking building. So naturally, they do a spot where he tries to set up for the Three Amigos. And like the smug prick he is, he starts doing all the Eddie poses and pisses off the crowd. And they do a good finish where Dom hits Rey with a second suplex. And after he takes a minute to mock the crowd and be a dirtbag, Rey catches him with a small package cradle and pins him. Crowd popped big for that. And they were quickly shut down by the heels afterwards. Priest eventually ran in to keep the gang assault going. And obviously you knew what this was setting up. Eventually we were going to get Bad Bunny and the rest of the LWO to come out to even the score. And probably in one of the more ludicrous things I've seen on a wrestling show in God knows how long. Get this picture. You had Priest standing in the ring dressing down Bad Bunny. And in the aisleway, Bad Bunny is standing with the Legado lackeys, kendo stick in hand. So he sends Escobar and crew to hit the ring. And as they slide into the ring, the babyfaces then run directly past Damian Priest so they can then tackle the other heels and fight off with them. Meanwhile, Priest is just stoically standing there glaring down Bad Bunny the whole time. The babyfaces are standing like 5 feet behind him fighting the other heels. I'm like, so is Damian Priest just invisible or something? The faces are just not aware that Priest is standing right there, not paying attention to them. Literally, all they had to do was turn around and cold cock Priest in the back of the head. It's not like he would have seen it coming. He wasn't paying any attention to them. Looked absurd. In any case, while the other pandemonium was going on in the background, Priest and Bunny had the stare down in the ring until Dom tried to charge at Bad Bunny, and he ate a kendo stick to the gut, and Priest powdered. And that was their go-home angle to set up Bad Bunny and Damian Priest for the San Juan street fight the following night, where invariably kendo sticks would be involved. They could have just called it a kendo stick on a pole match and they would have sold the angle better here. Honestly, it might have been more appropriate too. But, yeah, that was their closing bit. I mean, remove the crowd from the equation, the show kind of sucked. But when you factor in the crowd's reactions to everything, they were definitely into it. And we talked about it before. Sometimes the right environment can make up for any of the bad booking. I'm still mainly trying to wrap my head around all this draft stuff. I cannot make heads or tails out of virtually anything that's currently going on with the whole championship situation. And again, yes, I know the brand split doesn't technically come into full effect until this coming Raw, but even seeing Raw talent show up on SmackDown, it still kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Like, we literally just had a show the previous week where they're talking about who's going to go to what brand, and then 1 week later it's just thrown out the window. Like, none of that mattered. Cody Rhodes is going to Raw. 1 week later, he just shows right up on SmackDown like it's nothing. It doesn't really keep me hopeful that they're actually going to follow through with this brand split. Think about it. How long before they just go right back to having everybody jump ship from show to show every week? We know WWE has a track record of pulling stunts like that. Why would this situation be any different? I mean, you still got Vince hanging out in the periphery. His mustache is probably egging him on to do some really stupid shit in the coming months. You just wait. One day he'll wake up and say, "Oh, God damn it, pal, this brand split stuff is so stupid. Let's just go back to how things used to be. Everybody jumps from show to show. That's such good shit." But, again, this was merely the go-home SmackDown. What we're here to really talk about is the Backlash show from the Saturday night. So why don't we get into it? We spent enough time teasing the feuds. Now we can actually talk about what happened. And we go right back to where we started on SmackDown. Almost with the exact same verbiage from Michael Cole, too. We get the drone camera shot through the venue. It was literally a carbon copy of exactly how they opened the Friday show. I was actually wondering for a minute if I accidentally stumbled across a SmackDown replay instead of the actual Backlash pay-per-view. But, I mean, it all kind of goes back to my argument I made earlier. You see it once, the next time it happens, it's not as special. The first time we saw the crowd pan in the arena, it was awesome. But seeing it less than 24 hours done in the exact same way, now it doesn't mean as much. In any case, I watched this entire thing on Saturday night, and by that I mean I streamed it live, so I didn't really have the pleasure of getting to skip over anything that I really didn't want to see. There were periods where I kind of zoned out and did some other stuff while matches were happening in the background. But by and large, I mostly saw everything that happened. Doesn't mean that that was a good thing, but they sort of handcuffed me here with not being able to fast forward. And as I typically do when we do these pay-per-view recaps, I'll usually save my final thoughts until we get to the end. But I will say from the jump here, yes, the show still went way too long, and I've sort of just accepted the reality that every wrestling pay-per-view or live special is going to range somewhere in the 3.5 to 5 hour mark, no matter what the company is. They're all guilty of it. Going way too goddamn long with these pay-per-view specials that really could be done in like half the time. With that said, I wasn't bored at any point. Got a little antsy by the time we got about halfway through the Bad Bunny match, but as a whole, I would not say that I struggled to stay awake at any point. And for me, that is an upside. Because Lord knows, By the time we hit that 10:30 to 11 o'clock window Eastern time, I'm about fried. Then I come to the realization that we're usually only like halfway through the fucking pay-per-view to begin with. And then I'm really fuming. But I'll also credit them for making the right choice with what they had main event the show. Despite them having some hometown heroes as part of the overall card, they were at least smart enough to realize that there was really only one match that could have feasibly main evented this show. And obviously I'm talking about the Cody Brock match. Whether or not it actually came off like a main event caliber match, we'll talk about that when we get there. But out of anything they advertised here, Cody versus Brock had to main event. That was your featured attraction match. That was the big fight feel. Anything else that tried to follow it would have just weighed the show down. And as you come to expect, there were pros and cons. As we go through each match, you'll see that become more evidently clear. Kicking things off with the Bianca Io title match here for one of the belts. I think it was the Raw Women's title. And, yeah. So much for that babyface promo from Bianca on the Go Home show, right? You know, maybe I just wasn't paying all that close attention during the SmackDown show. But was Bianca getting healed that badly? And I just never noticed it during all the brawling with the girls? Because this wasn't even like a 60-40 split in favor of Io. This was like 90-10. So much so that even the announcers had to draw attention to it. Like, Bianca was one notch underneath Dom Mysterio in terms of the level of heat she was getting here. And quite frankly, I really don't know how any of it surfaced. Was her promo the night before that bad? Was this just an oddly pro-Io Sky crowd for whatever reason? I'm not sure. I mean, despite the hostile crowd, as quoted by Corey, aka the reverse psychology of the face-heel dynamic here, this was a really good match. And I genuinely mean that. You all know that I'm highly critical of a lot of women's wrestling, mainly in that so much of it is downright awful a lot of the time. But when I went back at the end of the show and tried to think which match stood out above the rest, I think I might have to give it to the Bianca Io match. It's not to say it was the best women's match I've ever seen. I wouldn't even particularly say it's the best Bianca or Io Sky match I've ever seen. But in terms of their positioning on the card and how they laid everything out, it was definitely one of the hotter matches of the night. And, you know, maybe that's because it was going on first. You know, naturally the crowd is going to be more livelier from the gate. Not the smoothest match from start to finish. You know, a little bit of clunkiness as they were in there longer. Bianca nearly crippling Io with that one-handed military press was gnarly. I mean, they had a clever idea there. And for the brief few seconds she was able to hold Io up in the air, it looked impressive. Then she kind of lost her grip and nearly dropped Io right on the back of her neck. Yeesh. No good. But, you know, how often is it the case where I complain that so much of modern wrestling is just a never-ending cycle of video game moves nonstop? Yes, this was a modern wrestling match. They did a lot of big near falls and kickouts, which I've talked about before, not being a fan of doing in opening matches on pay-per-views, but they had a central story throughout the match. They worked a body injury. Bianca sold the bad arm very well. They kind of factored it into the power game style and talked about how it lessens Bianca's ability to hit some of the bigger offensive moves. And again, it was lots of big high-impact moves from both girls. In a lot of cases, and the announcers were even drawing attention to this, the fact that this was sort of a proving ground match for Io, you know, her chance to show everybody what we've all been missing out with her on the main roster because of how badly they botched it. You know, she's been a third wheel in a trio faction for like 2 years now. We really haven't gotten to see the old Io Shirai, or Io Sky now, I guess, but, you know, the girl that was competing in NXT several years ago at a top level, when she was really making headway and at one point was probably one of the better female wrestlers in that entire roster. Things definitely picked up toward the finish when Dakota Kai and Bayley came out and started running distractions. Bianca ended up fighting them all off, but they had a really good false finish there where Io got out of a Bianca KOD and had her stacked up for a really close 2 count. Like, people actually thought that was going to be the finish right there. Then, of course, a few seconds later, they do a spot where Io has Bianca in prone position. Bayley's holding on to Bianca's ponytail on the floor, but the ref catches her and tells her to let go of it. Probably should have been cause for disqualification, but whatever, I'm not going to get into all that. But instead, Io was perched on the top rope, but she missed her overhead moonsault, and then Bianca picked her up and hit the KOD for the 3 count. Crowd shat all over the finish, as you'd probably expect, but, judging how Cole and Graves were calling this, kind of seemed like they might be contemplating the idea of running with a damage control split. Possibly with Io turning face and Bayley and Dakota staying heel for the time being. Which I'd be down for, honestly. Once again, the damage control thing really hasn't done a great deal of service for anybody involved. I think splitting up the trio and sending Io off as a singles might actually work well in her favor. I actually happen to think Io was one of the more talented female workers they have in that company. The only thing she has working against her is the language barrier, but anybody that's followed Io's run in NXT knows that she was one of the more heavily featured girls in that division at one point. She was good, too. Her and Asuka were like 2 of my favorite female wrestlers to come out of that developmental system. Bianca and Rhea being up there as well. We've seen WWE capitalize on Bianca and Rhea's momentum, and Io not so much. So I'm wondering if they actually try to take a run with her as a singles babyface. Kind of leaves Bayley and Dakota to piss in the wind, but I mean, hey, we all got to make sacrifices here and there, right? I'm also wondering how the healing of Bianca translates over to the States now. Do they maybe try to run with Bianca as the heel champion? Do they try to keep her face? Depends on the crowd reception, I guess. I remember Bianca having a run as a heel in NXT at one point. Maybe they ought to try it again and see how much they can milk a run out of it. But like I said, overall, really good match. Really good women's match, in fact. Probably one of the better women's matches I've seen in a while in WWE. The Charlotte Rhea WrestleMania 39 match still gets a lot of praise from people. Whatever. Charlotte's unprofessionalism always knocks her matches down a pedestal or two. The only thing I ever cared about in that match was seeing Rhea actually beat Charlotte this time. The finish that should have happened like 3 fucking years ago when they decided not to do it. But this match actually had drama to it because the fans really wanted to see Io win the title here, despite her being a heel. So there are even some hardcore Puerto Rican fans showing up to these events. Go figure. But so far, we were off to a really hot start. And then they follow that relatively good opener with no Moss. At least that's what I subconsciously heard in my head from the San Juan crowd when Omos came out for his entrance. They were saying, "No mas, WWE, no mas." This big lumbering oaf is long past the expiration date. Yet here we are in 2023. They're still trying to make this goof a thing. When did Omos debut in the WWE? Now I'm curious. I have to look this up. When was he doing the tag team with AJ? Wasn't that like 3 years ago? Let's see. Apparently his training started in 2019. And, oh yeah, he made a cameo in that Raw Underground thing that Shane McMahon was doing at one point. Of course, this is all during the Scamdemic era. Yeah, and then the second thing here is his teaming with AJ Styles, and that was from 2020 to 2021. I mean, the guy's been around for quite a while now, and he is, well, he's still no Moss. He's No Moss better as a wrestler now than he was 3 years ago. And you know what, actually, let me put a little bit of a asterisk next to that. I might have to rescind some of my burial comments on No Moss here. He became the top babyface in my book the moment he interrupted the fans chanting for Seth Rollins' god-awful fucking theme music. Got heat on him, that's for sure. But when he blindsided Rollins and got the fans to stop chanting the oh, made me happy. My God. You want to talk about another prime example of a guy's theme music being more over than the actual talent? For comparison's sake, see Adam Cole in AEW. Anyway, aside from me being annoyed by all the obnoxious chanting of Seth's music, by the way, the match is Omos versus Seth Rollins for anybody that did not understand my No Moss joke a minute ago. But this match was exactly what I figured it would be. Seth overbumped and oversold everything to try and get over No Moss's lack of anything resembling wrestling skill. As a match, it wasn't horrendous. Rollins idiot-proofed everything to the point where they really weren't able to fuck anything up all that badly. You know, take away my hatred for the music and whatever it is that Seth does when he comes out for his ring entrance, with the fucking gesticulating and the swimming and the weird effeminate poses. Take away all that. Seth has always been a naturally gifted athlete. He knows how to deliver when it comes bell time. And he really had his work cut out for him here. So in that domain, I'll give him credit. When you compile the list of all of No Moss's matches in WWE, I mean, am I wrong that this was easily his best? The Brock Lesnar match in Mania was too much of a dud to even be considered a good match. This was even better than that because they actually gave this one some time. And Rollins was able to actually carry the whole thing without No Moss visibly screwing anything up. And they did have some innovative spots here. I like the deal where No Moss was able to halt Rollins' curb stomp by just tightening his neck muscles and refusing to go down. That was a clever little spot they came up with. You had MVP out there too, but I mean, he was mostly ineffective. Just collateral damage when Rollins gave him the super kick at one point, and then we never saw him again. And after No Moss kicked out of 2 stomps, Rollins went up top and hit a super stomp to pin him, which evidently led the fans to start immediately going, "Yay, now we get to sing Seth's music again." Eat a dick. I'm so glad Rollins is staying on Raw. If I had to hear that fucking theme music every week on SmackDown, I'd have been boycotting this show until next year's draft. Or at least until the next time they put Rollins back on Raw. And like I said, it sucks too because Rollins is a great worker. He's a great wrestler. It's just every single gimmick they saddle this guy with, it's horrible. And you know, maybe the other thing too, and I've thought about this before, and I might have mentioned it, he's also a guy that's been around for a long time now. You know, when you go back and look at Seth's track record in WWE, when did he come up to the main roster? Was it like 2013? I mean, the point is, we're coming up on like 10 years of this. It's kind of like everything I talk about with the Usos. The argument of, how can I miss you when you never go away? You know, Rollins had that one freak injury several years ago where he was out for almost an entire year recovering. And when he came back, it felt fresh because we hadn't seen him in a long time. And, they repackaged his gimmick so much. Whatever this version of Rollins' gimmick is supposed to be, the goofy outfits, the cartoony personality, just the overall WWE presentation of him, it's not good. And for my money, it's never been good. Anytime WWE has given this guy a gimmick, it's been downright horrible. And it's only gotten worse over the last several years. When he was the world champion and they were kind of doing like the Weasley chicken shit heel stuff with him, that at least worked for a time being. But everything they've done with him after that is just, I don't know. It's not for me. And the problem too right now is that when you factor in that Raw is going to soon have its own world championship, you got to presume they're going to have Rollins as one of the top guys pursuing the belt, right? If not outright winning the fucking thing. Which is a horrible freaking idea for a sizable list of reasons. But in the scope of where we are in the current talent pool, who else would you be able to safely plug into that top spot right about now? Cody's the other obvious choice, but you really don't have many other options right now. And we've already seen world champion Seth Rollins before. It's been done. It's really not breaking any new ground if they went back to the well with it again. He's a serviceable upper mid-card talent in today's climate, but is he someone you're really clamoring to see have another go at the belt? Is he your go-to pick? I sure hope not. I'd advocate them putting the world title on Cody before ever putting it on Seth. The Raw version of it. And I still think it'd be incredibly stupid to put that thing on Cody, too. I mean, it's incredibly stupid to have that belt, period, but I'm sort of digressing from the conversation here. The moral to the story is Seth Rollins' music needs to change. So does his gimmick. And Omos still sucks. You ready to move on? Because I am. Let's talk about this three-way U.S. title match with Bobby Lashley, Bronson Reed, and Austin Theory. Because, of course, you had to figure we were going to have a three-way on the card. Y'all remember when three-ways used to be a novelty in wrestling? Remember when we only used to have them on occasion for real special moments? When storylines would actually call for multi-person matches? And, not just arbitrarily doing them every fucking week on television because he can. Ugh. I mean, truthfully, I didn't have a whole ton to say about this. Hear me always talk about how I think the dynamics of three-ways and four-ways work better when you have an outnumbered count of babyfaces versus heels. I always think it works better when you got a babyface fighting from underneath more, getting double or triple teamed by the heels and having to fend them all off one at a time. They kind of sort of had that dynamic going here. Lashley was the obvious babyface. Theory was a heel. I think Bronson was a heel. I mean, him and Theory worked together for a while to double team Lashley, even though that lasted all of like 8 seconds and counting. Gave me the impression that Bronson Reed was a bad guy, but I mean, who even knows with modern wrestling 50% of the time? Bronson's a big dude, but he's definitely got that Bam Bam Bigelow agility to him. He can move. He's very versatile for what he can do in the ring. He's not the smoothest worker. He's definitely somebody I would keep on the radar as he kind of develops more and gets more comfortable in the ring. I haven't heard him do a lot of promo work before. I think he's Australian, if I'm not mistaken. But I followed a little bit of his run in NXT. He was fine. I don't really remember them doing that much with him. So it's good that they're kind of pushing him on the main roster. Of course, they went with every chicken shit heel finish for a multi-man match you've ever seen. Bronson misses a moonsault. Lashley spears Bronson. And then Theory grabs Lashley and throws him out of the ring so he can steal the pin. A never-before-seen concept in the history of every WWE multi-person match ever. Predictable finish aside, keeping the title on Theory is probably the right call. They sort of alluded here to the idea that Lashley might be next in line to challenge Roman. Sure. I mean, like, I don't care. I'm still a believer that they fucked up by not having Cody beat Roman in Mania. People are going to argue this until the end of time. I'll just stick to my guts and say, no, they made the wrong call. Especially with everything we're seeing post-WrestleMania, Raw having its own world title, Cody and Roman now being on separate brands. I mean, the more you actually look at this, the whole thing just seems more and more geared toward them getting Cody as far away from Roman as possible. Is anybody else seeing that, or am I the only one? I mean, if it's Lashley versus Roman, fine. It's whatever. I don't have a problem with Lashley, but he's been so ice cold for so long now. I highly doubt you're going to rally up people to buy the idea that he could actually beat Roman. Nor would I advise it. But we'll see what they do. But that was that match. Interested to see what Theory does on SmackDown as the US champion now that Gunther's going to Raw with the IC title. I could see Theory working with guys like Cameron Grimes or maybe even a babyface LA Knight if they really wanted to go all in with the LA Knight push. Quit going against the grain with him as a heel and flip him. Now the crowd actually has an incentive to cheer him in most venues. You know, Theory's a guy that you could always plug into that smug chicken shit heel role. So that actually might be a good program. Both guys can talk. They look good. Why not? But again, though, we'll see how they go about running that marathon on the Friday shows. So then we came to the other girls' match on the card. The SmackDown title match with Zelina Vega challenging Rhea Ripley. And, yeah. Do y'all remember when I was covering the absurdity of seeing Zelina try and have a believably competitive match with Rhea Ripley? Well, I've seen it. Didn't work in execution. And I know people are going to rake me over the coals for daring to have such an opinion on the matter, but I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. Would Zelina Vega have gotten this title match if she wasn't of Puerto Rican descent? Up until she was given a title match on a random backstage pre-tape with Adam Pearce, can anybody name the last TV match Zelina Vega worked prior? Can anybody even name the last thing she did on TV before asking for the title match? I can't. And I watch the show every week. One week she just walked into Adam Pearce's office and was automatically crowned the number one contender because they were going to Puerto Rico and Zelina's a native. That was their rationale. You know, and while it's fine to do the whole hometown hero getting the title shot story once in a blue moon, this one just felt so artificial and forced. You know, at some point you'd have thought somebody with some balls would have stepped in and said, are we running a Make-A-Wish all of a sudden? Maybe I'm being too harsh on it, but this just didn't work for me. The best thing I've ever seen Zelina Vega do in WWE was when she was a mouthpiece for Andrade in NXT. Not as a wrestler, though. And maybe I've seen her do work elsewhere outside the WWE. Did she work for TNA at one point? She might have. Again, though, I don't remember her doing a whole lot of wrestling there either. Maybe it's a visual thing. I mean, she's tiny. Like, really fucking tiny. and you put her in the ring with Rhea Ripley and try to get me to buy that this could be remotely competitive? Come on now. Again, it's called suspension of disbelief. Getting me to actually buy that this is real. And I look at these two on paper and I think, why wouldn't Rhea be able to go in there and just smash over this chick in 20 seconds? Again, if this were real, put that little caveat up there because I know people are going to come firing at me for making such a comment. But like I said, this just, nah, didn't work. You know, there was something where Zelina's mom gave her a flip-flop or something at ringside. Apparently this is some kind of Puerto Rican heritage where it went completely over my head. Michael Cole's exact quote, he said, "If you understand it, you will get its significance." Unquote. I did not get the significance. I saw Zelina throw a flip-flop in Rhea's general direction and the crowd popped. Was that supposed to be a sign of disrespect? Was she flipping Rhea the hypothetical bird? I don't know. At one point, she hit Rhea with one of the weakest 619s I've ever seen. She also followed it with one of those meteors that I always cringe at. Gonna tear up your knees doing stupid shit like that. Of course, I didn't mention the crying. Yeah, there was plenty of that going on here. Because that's what every woman does in wrestling when they finally make it to the big stage. They start crying and weeping. This is my common argument against anybody that says men and women are virtually the same. Anyway, they did more stuff for a while. Rhea tried to work the bully heel role. Zelina was an okay underdog, sympathetic babyface. Like, the crowd was obviously behind her. But nobody expected a title switch here. Which also kind of left the match dangling in the open. Like, if anybody actually expected Zelina was going to win the belt, you could have had a similar atmosphere to like what we had in the opener with Bianca and Io, where people actually bought into the near falls. Nobody bought any of that here. They knew what it was, and they sort of just accepted the fate of being disappointed at the end. Rhea won with the Riptide, and Zelina spent like an extra 5 minutes in the ring crying while the fans cheered for her. You know, probably a real special moment for the fans live, but I'm not into the whole gushy love fest thing in professional wrestling. Like, I pay money to see dudes fuck each other up in a worked fashion, spitting in each other's general direction and settling grudges to find out who the better wrestler is. I don't pay to watch a bullshit Miss America drama sob hour where I have to watch women cry for 10 minutes straight just because they got a featured match on a wrestling card. Sorry, not sorry. Hate if you want. That's just the way I see it. I think I was more so just prepping my frustrations for what came next. The San Juan Street Fight. The anticipated special attraction match featuring Bad Bunny going up against the Judgment Day's Damian Priest. Boy, was it Judgment Day for poor fucking Damian by the end of this calamity. Let me tell you. And of course, you had to figure, as soon as Bad Bunny came out, what should he be wheeling down to the ring but fucking plunder? Straight out of the ECW playbook. Shopping cart filled with all kinds of goodies. Kendo sticks, chairs, trash can lids, stop signs. Only thing missing was the obligatory blow-up doll. Then we could have had a Tommy Dreamer fap session. And immediately my worst fears came to fruition as soon as I saw the shopping cart full of gimmicks. Because I knew exactly what kind of match this was going to be from that point onward. And I was proven right. It was a modern garbage match. Just take away a lot of the blood, gore, and violence you're used to seeing on the other network. The modern WWE garbage match is hit each other with a bunch of shit for a while, do some occasional wacky stunt spots, put somebody through a table, call it a day. Faint praise. Somehow we ended up getting through this whole thing without the breakaway table spot. And, while it didn't directly start off with the weapon stuff, just the fact that you knew the shopping cart was sitting there on the floor, like you knew it was going to come into play at some point. And that was more so the problem. And that's unfortunate because watching Priest out there just be a normal, standard big guy heel and beat on Bad Bunny for an extended period of time, he's actually really good. He's got the mean, smug facials. He knows how to work the crowd and slow things down. And prior to them getting all cute with the plunder, I just kept wondering to myself, how much better would this match have been if it was just a normal wrestling match? Did you need to dress it up with all the gimmicks just because you could? What was it that facilitated this being a street fight to begin with? Because Bad Bunny attacked Damian Priest with a kendo stick on TV one time? In that case, couldn't you have just made it a no DQ match and only involved the kendo stick as part of the story? I mean, it still would have been dumb, because kendo sticks have always been dumb in wrestling. But at least it would have factored into the overall story. And, it wasn't just the weapons thing that dragged us down. All the interference stuff for like a quarter of the match. Like, that shit was just absurd. And of course, everybody has to have music hit for their run-ins, which makes the whole thing more preposterous, immediately throwing all believability out the window that these run-ins are organically happening. You get run-ins from Balor and Dom, followed by run-ins from Rey Mysterio, followed by a completely random cameo run-in from fucking Carlito. And I like Carlito, but the fuck? How was he factored into any of this? Moreover, how did the production team know to cue up his music unless they knew he was going to be part of this match already? You see what I mean with the whole music hit for run-in angles? And how absurd it all is? But the ridiculous didn't stop there, because then you get the LWO crew, you get Savio Vega coming down the aisleway to fight off Balor and Dom. Keep in mind, this is all taking up like a good 3 or 4 minutes. Meanwhile, there is a match still going on. And after all the crowd pops for the surprise run-ins, they all disappear. They powder. We never see them again. And then they just go right back to having the normally scheduled match. Like all of that never happened. We never see anybody involved in the brawl again. And I guess we just presume that they all killed each other in the back, and we never get an update on what happened. Either that, or they all went off to catering together. So, of course, Priest and Bunny are still having a match. And they go through a series of back and forth moves at the end with Bunny working over a knee injury on Priest. Even though Priest is supposed to be the heel, he's getting a body limb targeted and trying to fight back from it. Sold it great. But why would I want to see the bad guy favor a knee injury when I'm supposed to hate him? And the whole thing at the end finally concluded with Bad Bunny giving Priest that fucking Panama Sunrise move, which was beyond ridiculous. Mostly in the sense that the move itself has always looked ridiculous and fake. And then I'm seeing a 180-pound indie musician give a grown-ass 250-pound athlete that move, and I'm supposed to think this shit is real? So yeah, Bad Bunny pinned Damian Priest clean. 1, 2, 3. Middle of the ring. Thanks for coming, Damian. Good luck with the rest of your career. Trying to bounce back from this abomination. And beyond my problems with the whole structure and layout of the match, here's my issue more than anything. Bad Bunny. He's worked a match or two in the WWE before, but he's not a Pat McAfee or a Logan Paul. The problem when you do these kinds of celebrity matches is that when you smoke and mirror shit like this so often with all the weapons and all the cameo appearances and all the running angles, you start treading a lot of gray area where you start giving off the illusion that anybody can do this because all you have to do is add weapons and 10,000 run-ins, and it all takes away from the art of what professional wrestling was always supposed to be. And I know this is the jaded, cynical fan of me talking, but hear me out. Any ham and egger can learn how to do the modern garbage match. It doesn't take a lot of effort. You could train a monkey how to hit somebody with a fucking kendo stick. Can they actually work? That's the important question. Pat McAfee has proven he can work. Logan Paul has proven he can work. Yes, to be fair, they have done the smoke and mirrors kind of match too. But they've also wrestled. And they're also athletes. Bad Bunny is not. So by the time this is all over, the only thing I saw was a small, scrawny rap artist in a shit brown bodysuit have a garbage indie match with a grown adult pro wrestler. And beat him. Which was just horrifically insulting on every level. You know, the other problem too is the match went way too fucking long. Like when you factor in all the weapon stuff, the crowd brawling, the injury angle on Priest's knee, the 47 different run-ins, plus everything that happened with Bad Bunny having to break out like 90 moves in a row before actually finally pinning Damian Priest. It was the epitome of putting a hat on a hat on a hat. Overbooked to the point that even Vince Russo would put his hand up and say, "Bro, this is overkill." And it may have come off well in the building. And good for them. I cannot argue that the crowd really enjoyed this. But I did not. I thought it hurt Damian Priest. It's so much of what I complain about with modern wrestling today when you give off the impression that anybody can do this. Doesn't matter how long you're training in the business or whether or not you truly understand the business at a grassroots level. So long as you can do the dives and hit somebody with weapons and do a bunch of fake moves for 15 plus minutes, that's all it takes. This is what we've trained people to understand about wrestling now. And for the kind of wrestling that I grew up watching, this kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Call it what you want. But I just think this whole thing was way too overproduced. It's modern WWE presentation, and I've talked about it before. I'm not a big fan of it. And God, speaking of never-ending, they followed that never-ending saga with a six-man. Bloodline versus Sami, KO, and Matt Riddle. The other never-ending saga, that being the Owens and Zayn versus Usos portion of the Bloodline story. And, you know, I've already covered a lot of my thoughts on how badly they butchered the whole Bloodline feud coming out of WrestleMania, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that. The more I see it fester on TV, the more I continue to assert that they should have moved on from this whole thing after Mania was over. Because now we're way beyond the simple idol mode when it comes to this. They've about hit their wall. And I know they're still trying to move things along with Solo Sikoa as part of the next chapter in the story, but considering how long I might have to wait to see that evident payoff, dude, I don't think I can make it that long. I mean, the match was good for what it was, but I was only mainly watching for the finish. Anything else that happened prior to the last few minutes was sort of an afterthought in my book. I can only watch the Usos do 87 super kicks per match before I start fishing for the remote. You see one of their matches, you've seen them all. What they did was all right, but really nothing you hadn't already seen from the previous Usos, Sami, Kevin Owens encounters. Riddle getting thrown in there as the third wheel always felt contrived. I mean, Sikoa needed to be there for part of the story, but I don't know. The stuff where Sikoa was showing dissension with Jimmy and Jay, like blind tagging them and getting in their faces throughout the match, I mean, they were alluding to the idea that he was going to turn on them so much. It was obvious by the end that he wasn't. And again, too, for me, by the time we got to this point in the show, I was already starting to get a little fatigued. I mean, this match went a little over 20 minutes, too. They probably could have condensed it down to like 12 or 13 because it really started to drag there. They did the whole breakdown and communication spot at one point where Jimmy accidentally caught Jay with the super kick. That would have been the perfect point to take the match home when the crowd popped for the oh shit spot. But instead they had Jimmy kicked out of the pop-up powerbomb, and then it just kept going for another 7 or 8 minutes. They also had a great chance to take it home when Sikoa and Jay were doing the stare down, and Sammy caught Sikoa with the haluva kick in the corner and then followed it by hitting Jay. For whatever reason, they had Sikoa run in and break up the fall right then and there, literally just after having been hit with Sammy's finish like 10 seconds prior. They do some more stuff for a while until Sikoa got the blind tag at the end. Riddle hit one of the Usos with that pancake tombstone pile driver. And then Sikoa came in, immediately spiked Riddle with the Oriental spike, and then pinned him flatter than 4 o'clock. So they beat Riddle again, which was an eye roller. I thought putting the babyfaces over here was a better call than putting the heels over. To me, the Bloodline winning doesn't make a lick of sense. Like, I understand the entire babyface team is going to Raw after this, so you had to sort of end the feud somehow, but ending it with the fucking heels getting the last laugh? Why? You know, especially now that you're teasing dissension with the entire faction, wouldn't this have been the perfect way to do the split with having Sikoa lead the Usos for dead and then walk out? Maybe send the Usos away for a while so they can leave Roman, Heyman, and Sikoa as a 3-person unit? I don't know. Just a thought. That fantasy booking mentality coming into play. Or, you know, they could just do this finish and yeah. Blech. That's what I thought after it was over. I just said, blech. Good wrestling. Bad call with the finish. But again, you know, hopefully with Owens, Zayn, and Riddle going to Raw now, that means this whole Bloodline feud is done for now and they can move on to something else. Because I'm about ready for a shakeup when it comes to the SmackDown side of things. But as I kind of expected, the only thing that could truly main event the card, Cody Rhodes versus Brock Lesnar. This was the special attraction for the show. Anything else that tried to follow it was merely subordinate by comparison. While I've been openly critical of many Brock Lesnar matches in the past, looking at this match with him and Cody on paper, it is certainly one of the more intriguing Brock Lesnar matches I've seen in a while. I haven't been extensively following this feud on Raw. I saw the clips when Brock turned on Cody and left him for dead like a month ago, but how they've gone about building this up on television, haven't really been paying all that close attention to it. Still, the idea of Cody versus Brock on paper, it is intriguing. And while, yes, this was essentially every Brock Lesnar match you've seen in the last decade, you know, the jumpstart with Cody kept it hot from the beginning. He did the big dive out to the floor, took the fight immediately to Lesnar from the opening bell, a rare occasion where the jumpstart is actually warranted, considering this was an actual grudge match where Cody has been actively wanting to get his hands on Brock. And of course, Brock is able to fight back and starts doing all his usual suplex and throws. It's nothing you haven't ever seen out of any Brock Lesnar match a million times before. And several minutes go by where I'm just sort of buying my time, waiting for things to pick up once Cody starts milking the comeback. I mean, I've seen the Suplex City shit more times than I care to count, and it was boring after the first 3 or 4 times I saw it, much less having to watch it in every Brock Lesnar match. Hence why I don't get particularly excited to see him wrestle anymore, because I know exactly what I'm going to see every time. It's like watching a Beta Bucks match on the other channel. And if there was anything in this match that was beautifully apropos, it was the fortuitous juice. And it couldn't have come at a better time. Right when the match needed to kick into the next gear, boom! Brock gets drop toe hold into the exposed turnbuckle and cuts himself open hard way. Blood is immediately pouring from his head. Looked like a war zone out there in a matter of seconds. And of course, Cody's right there to immediately take the fight back to Brock. He's hitting Brock with several disaster kicks and cutters. He gets Brock with a pair of crossroads. Brock is able to hoist up Cody and hit him with an F5. Only got a near fall off of that. And then we get this finish. Very odd finish. And I wasn't entirely sure what to make of it when it was over. First of all, it came right the fuck out of nowhere. Brock has Cody in the Kimura lock, and Cody is able to fold up Brock and pin his shoulders to the mat for a surprise 3 count. Literally from out of nowhere. Brock even sold it like, what the hell just happened? And of course, Cody immediately powders. You got Brock in there looking like he's about to have a fucking conniption. You know, the officials petrified to come within 20 feet of the guy, figuring Brock would have probably snapped on him as a shoot. That's probably why he didn't stop the match when Brock got cut open on the buckle. You want to be that official that has to tell Brock that they have to stop the match so they can wipe off the blood? Brock would have killed that guy. He'd have looked at him and said, "No, that doesn't work for me, brother. My ass we're stopping this match." But all seriousness, though, that was it? That was their finish they came up with? A surprise flash roll-up because Cody outsmarted Brock by using his own finish against him? And not even a real decisive finish, like Cody got his sweet revenge. Hell yeah. It was more like a Cody got lucky and barely escaped through the skin of his teeth scenario. At least that's how it came across to me as a fan. I didn't really see it as Cody seeking his revenge on Brock after all the horrible shit he put him through. I saw it as Cody kind of got a fluke pin. He was on the verge of having his arm ripped out of his socket until Cody got lucky and stacked him up at the end. Kind of flat. I mean, I actually missed the finish the first go-around. I was still typing up notes while Brock had the Kimura on. I just presumed Cody was going to grab the ropes and they would have kept doing some stuff. I didn't think Cody would actually win. Maybe I'm the only one, but yeah, that was a weird finish. Cody winning was definitely the right call. You had to do that. But in that manner, almost like they did it to give Brock some kind of outing. Why? Why do you need to protect Brock? I mean, I didn't hate the match or anything, but when I look back, it was kind of a nothing match. I think I counted, the whole thing was under 10 minutes. Definitely didn't need to be a long match, but I don't know. I guess I was expecting a little more than what we got. Because if this is part of Cody's redemption story on his track back to the world title, shouldn't this win have come off more convincing than it did? Getting the 1-2-3 off the crossroads would have been perfect. But here, they didn't really give you the impression that Cody won this convincingly. More so, they left the door open for a rematch down the road, which I wouldn't be opposed to. Maybe there's more that's yet to be unveiled. Guess we'll see. I mean, it doesn't seem likely that this was a one-and-done kind of feud. Like Cody versus Brock, that's something you could really milk over an extended period of time. So maybe they're building to something else. But guess we'll see. I wouldn't even say it was a bad finish. It was just very uncreative. That's my problem with it. So all in all, judging the show as a whole, it's definitely gotten rave reviews from the critics out there. The crowd was really great for the majority of the show, though, as they were for SmackDown. I think in general, this exceeded a lot of initial expectations, and that's probably why it'll get severely overrated as being a great show. It was a good WWE special. Not every match was my cup of tea. I was not a fan of the street fight, but I didn't detest it. I mean, I've seen plenty of garbage matches in wrestling that I just downright hated. Like hardcore matches that maybe just want to quit watching wrestling as a whole. You know, that one didn't quite reach that breaking point. I didn't like seeing Priest's job. That was probably more infuriating than the actual layout of the match looking back. Again, though, you know, like I said, probably my favorite match on the card was the women's opener with Bianca and Io. And I know that's a shocking thing to hear coming from me, the guy who normally shits on women's wrestling because of how brutal it is on a mainstream basis a lot of the time. But those girls deserve a lot of credit. That was a really damn good match. I thought Io shined there. Bianca had one of the better main roster matches I've seen probably since the Sasha match a few years ago. There was a lot for those girls to be proud of in that match. Mostly everything else I saw was solid to good. And that's perfectly fine. I'm still a little skeptical about the finish to the Cody Brock match right now, but maybe we'll see more of that unfold in the coming months, especially as we edge closer to SummerSlam. Again, I would not be against the idea of a rematch between them, but if they are going to rematch it, hopefully it's more than what they gave us here. That's all I'm saying. But that was our Stellar Monday report. A little bit more lengthy than the normal one. And I think that's all I got overall. So we will be back this coming Friday. Regularly scheduled podcast with AEW Dynamite and the Crockett reviews and the World Class reviews. And we'll keep our radar open here as we edge closer to the end of the month because we do have a couple pay-per-view events coming up. I'm not going to look it up now, but appreciate you all tuning in for this one. If you like the show, make sure you give it a thumbs up, subscribe. You can either check us out on YouTube or Rumble, depending on which platform you prefer. And catch you all in a few days. Thanks for watching. Peace out.